The sound was wrong. It wasn't the explosive crack of the starter's pistol, nor the thunderous roar of 80,000 souls packed into the stadium. A sound that vibrated deep in your bones. It was a wet, sickening thud, a percussive beat of flesh and bone against the unforgiving synthetic track that was utterly alien to the rhythm of the race. One moment, Leo the Comet Carter, the golden boy of American sprinting, was a fluid masterpiece of explosive power. His form perfect, his victory in the 100-meter Olympic trial final, a foregone conclusion. The next, he was a crumpled heap, a tangled ruin of limbs on the stark blue oval, his face a mask of agony. From her less-than-prime vantage point near the auxiliary medical entrance, a spot befitting her freelance contract with a small, underfunded athletics club, Dr. Eris Thorne felt a familiar, cold dread snake down her spine. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced so acutely since her own promising gymnastics career had been shattered on a dismount years ago. She saw the swarm of officially sanctioned medical personnel, their pristine white National Athletics Federation, NAF, jackets a beacon of authority, converging on Leo. They moved with a practiced, almost robotic efficiency, their gazes immediately fixed on the lower half of his body. A hamstring pull? A torn Achilles? It was the logical conclusion, the standard occupational hazard for a human pushing their body past its conceivable limits. But Eris's eyes, trained by years of observation and a deep, almost instinctual understanding of athletic kinesiology, saw more. She saw the subtle tells the others were missing, the silent screams the body sends when the wires inside get crossed. It was the faint, almost imperceptible cyanosis, a bluish tint creeping around Leo's lips, a stark contrast to his dark skin. It was the shallow, gasping breaths, a frantic, inefficient flutter that didn't align with the agony of a torn muscle. And most damningly, it was the way his left arm was clamped across his sternum, not instinctively guarding a pulled muscle, but pressed inward, a desperate, futile attempt to contain the violent, chaotic tremor erupting within his chest. "It's not his leg," she muttered, her voice a ghost, swallowed by the rising murmur of concern that was slowly replacing the earlier cheers. "Something else, something bad." Dr. Ramirez, the lead NAF physician, a man whose starched white coat seemed to radiate an aura of unassailable self-importance, was already barking orders. He knelt beside the fallen sprinter, his movements clipped and officious. "Where does it hurt, Leo? Point to it. Show me where it hurts." Leo, his eyes wide with a terror that transcended pain, tried to speak, but only a choked gurgle escaped his lips. Undeterred, Ramirez began to palpate Leo's calf muscle, his brow furrowed in a display of deep, professional concentration. Aris's blood ran cold. He was checking the man's leg while his heart was failing. They were wasting time. Precious, irreplaceable, life-altering seconds were ticking away, lost to protocol and diagnostic arrogance. The ghost of a young college soccer player she'd worked with years ago flashed in her mind's eye. Similar signs, the same subtle warnings, dismissed as a panic attack by the head physician until it was too late. The memory was a sharp, visceral jab, a scar on her professional soul. "He's not getting enough air," Eris yelled, her voice cutting through the growing commotion with a raw edge of authority. She started to move, a primal instinct overriding the part of her brain that screamed about contracts, liability, and career suicide. A stout security guard, his face a mask of bored officialdom, stepped into her path, his body a solid wall of indifference. "Ma'am, you're not authorized to be on the track," he stated, his voice flat and devoid of urgency. "Get out of my way!" Eris's voice was tight, with a fear that had nothing to do with her own precarious professional standing and everything to do with the life fading on the track. "He's in cardiac distress. He needs help now." Ramirez glanced up from his examination of Leo's ankle, his eyes narrowing with pure irritation. The disruption to his carefully managed scene was an affront. "Who is this woman? Security, remove her. Now." Aris ignored them both. The guard, the doctor, the roaring crowd, they all melted away. There was only Leo. She vaulted over the low aluminum barrier separating the stands from the track, landing with a jarring thud on the unforgiving, synthetic surface. A new gasp rippled through the stadium, this one not of concern for the athlete, but of shock at her audacious, unsanctioned intrusion. She scrambled to Leo's side, the stench of ozone and rubber filling her nostrils. His skin was clammy, his eyes beginning to flutter. "Dr. Ramirez, for God's sake, listen to me," she pleaded, her voice raw with desperation. "Look at him, the color, the breathing. It's not musculoskeletal. This is cardiac." Ramirez stood up, his face flushed a deep, angry red. He towered over her, a physical embodiment of the medical establishment she had so often found herself at odds with. "I am a board-certified physician. I have been the head of NAF Medical for 12 years. I know how to assess an athlete. You are an unqualified, hysterical interloper. Leave immediately or I will have you arrested for assault." His tone was a weapon designed to dismiss, belittle, and humiliate. But Eris was beyond humiliation. She was staring into the abyss of a preventable death. Driven by the primal instinct to save, fueled by the ghost of the young man she couldn't, she made a split-second decision that would detonate her life. She placed her hands firmly on Ramirez's starched white coat and shoved, hard. He stumbled backward, a comical look of disbelief on his face. His carefully constructed authority shattered in an instant. In that fleeting moment of chaos, Eris dropped to her knees beside Leo. "Call for a defibrillator, now!" she screamed at the stunned and frozen medical staff. Then, without a flicker of hesitation, she laced her fingers together, placed the heel of her hand on Leo's sternum, and began chest compressions. Her movements were precise, forceful, and rhythmic, a brutal but life-giving dance honed by years of training and an intimate, almost spiritual understanding of the human body under extreme stress. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. The stadium fell into a stunned, almost sacred silence. The only sound was her strained counting and the rhythmic press of her hands against Leo's chest. Officer Miller arrived, his face a grim mask of duty. He saw a scene of pure anarchy, a civilian physically assaulting a respected medical professional on a secured Olympic trials track. His perspective was simple, black and white. Rules had been broken. Order had to be restored. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the athlete," he ordered, his voice the calm, unwavering baritone of law enforcement. His hand instinctively moved to rest on his holstered sidearm. "He'll die if I do," Eris retorted, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps as she continued the relentless compressions. Her hair was stuck to her sweat-soaked forehead. "He's in ventricular fibrillation. Every second counts. Get me an AED." She was a whirlwind of focused energy, her voice a desperate plea against the rising tide of confusion and bureaucratic paralysis. From the climate-controlled comfort of the VIP section, Mark Donahue, the slick and powerful chief executive of the NAF, watched the unfolding catastrophe with a tightening jaw. This was a disaster of epic proportions. Live television cameras, hungry for drama, were capturing every chaotic, unsanctioned moment. His carefully crafted image of a smoothly run, professional organization was crumbling before his eyes, all thanks to some rogue trainer he'd never even heard of. His phone was already vibrating, undoubtedly a major sponsor wanting to know what the hell was going on. Finally, like a mirage in the desert, 2 paramedics arrived with a gurney and a defibrillator. Eris, her face streaked with sweat and grime, didn't stop her compressions, barking out her assessment as they knelt beside her. "Probable hypertrophic cardiomyopathy-induced VFib. We need to shock him." Reluctantly, and with visible skepticism, they followed her lead. The rhythmic, high-pitched beeping of the machine filled the stunned silence as the pads were applied. "Charging! Clear!" Leo's body convulsed violently on the track. A collective guttural gasp echoed through 80,000 chests. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, there was nothing. Then, slowly, raggedly, Leo Carter coughed, a wet, rattling sound. His eyes fluttered open, confused and unfocused, but open. He was alive. A wave of palpable relief washed over the stadium, a physical force you could feel, quickly followed by a surge of bewildered, excited murmurs. Eris, her body trembling with exhaustion and the lingering, poisonous kiss of adrenaline, barely registered the shift in the atmosphere. Her focus remained solely on Leo, monitoring his shallow breaths as the paramedics worked. As they carefully transferred the dazed sprinter onto a stretcher, Mark Donahue descended from the stands like a wrathful god from Olympus, his expensive Italian shoes silent on the track. He brushed past the relieved but chastened medical staff and stopped directly in front of Eris, who was still kneeling, trying to catch her breath. "You," he said, his voice dangerously low, each word a venom-tipped dart, "are a menace." Eris, her muscles screaming in protest, looked up at him, her eyes blazing with a righteous anger that matched his own cold fury. "I saved his life." "You defied direct orders from a senior physician. You assaulted him. You created a spectacle that has done untold damage to our brand," Donahue hissed, his face a mask of controlled rage. "You think this is about saving one athlete? This is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. This is about the integrity of the sport, about sponsorships that pay for everything you see here, about a public image that we spend millions to cultivate. You have no idea the damage you've done." "The only damage I see is a star athlete who almost died because your protocol was too busy checking his damn ankle," Eris shot back, her voice shaking but firm. Donahue's lips curled into a sneer of pure contempt. "Consider your freelance contract terminated, effective immediately. In fact, consider yourself blacklisted. I'll personally see to it that you never get a credential from any professional athletic organization in this country again. You're finished. And I wouldn't be surprised if the local DA decides to press charges for your little intervention." He gestured dismissively towards the departing ambulance, which was now carrying away his prize asset. "Now get off my track." Humiliation burned in Eris's chest, hot and acidic, but it was overshadowed by a cold, hard certainty that settled deep in her bones. She would do it again. In a heartbeat, she would always choose a life over a rule. As she was escorted from the stadium by a grim-faced Officer Miller, the cheers for the recovering Leo Carter faded into a distant, mocking hum. The online world, however, was just beginning to ignite. The initial reports, carefully spun and fed to friendly media outlets by Donahue's ruthlessly efficient PR team, painted a picture of a chaotic scene instigated by an unauthorized and hysterical individual who had interfered with the expert medical care of a national hero. The rage bait had been cast, and the internet, in its infinite and immediate judgment, was taking it. The stale air of her small, one-bedroom apartment felt suffocating. The adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the cold, creeping dread of a life imploding. Her phone, lying on the scarred IKEA coffee table, was a vibrating harbinger of doom, buzzing incessantly with notifications. It was a digital assault. Hateful messages from strangers flooded her social media inboxes. Her face was plastered across every sports news website, usually in an unflattering screen grab showing her shoving Dr. Ramirez. Jessica Chang's initial article for the sports megasite Athletosphere, titled "Rogue Trainers' Reckless Actions Overshadow Olympic Trials," had gone viral within the hour. The comment section was a cesspool of armchair medical experts and misogynistic trolls. Who does she think she is? Some groupie trying to get her 15 minutes of fame? She should be in jail. You can't just assault a doctor on national TV. Probably some quack who got her doctor title from a cereal box. What a disgrace. The carefully curated outrage machine was a thing of terrible beauty. Viewers, fed the dramatic footage of Eris pushing a seemingly calm authority figure, readily jumped to the most damning conclusions. They were enraged by her audacity, her defiance, her perceived attack on order and expertise. The official cease and desist letter from the NAF's high-powered legal firm arrived the next morning, delivered by a humorless courier. Her sister, Sarah Thorne, a no-nonsense public defender with a perpetually worried expression, read it with a deep, weary sigh, her fingers tracing the embossed letterhead. "Eris, you really stepped in it this time," she said, collapsing onto the lumpy sofa. "They're threatening everything. Assault, battery, interfering with emergency medical procedures, practicing medicine without a state license on site. Donahue isn't bluffing. He's a shark, and you're bleeding in his water. He wants to make an example of you." "But I saved his life, Sarah. I was right. Doesn't that matter?" Eris's voice was laced with a frustration so profound it felt like a physical weight in her chest. "Of course it matters morally, but legally it's complicated," Sarah explained, her lawyer brain clicking into gear. They'll argue you created a dangerous situation, that you prevented their trained personnel from doing their jobs. They'll say you got lucky. They have a dozen witnesses who will say you were out of control. We need to be smart. And that means being quiet. No public statements. Let me handle this. Sarah's pragmatism was usually a comforting anchor for Eris's more impulsive nature, but in this moment, it felt like a gag. She was being silenced, her reputation being shredded in the public square while she was forced to watch from the sidelines. The official statement from Metro General Hospital, where Leo was recovering, was a masterpiece of corporate deflection, clearly written in collaboration with the NAF. It spoke of Leo's serious but stable condition, and vaguely alluded to unforeseen complications during the initial on-field assessment which were eventually resolved. Resolved. As if by magic. Eris's name was conspicuously, deafeningly absent. Dr. Ramirez, now positioned as the calm hero who had weathered the storm, gave a televised press conference orchestrated by the NAF. He was a portrait of composed professionalism, subtly and skillfully painting Eris as a dangerously disruptive force. In any high-pressure medical situation, protocol is paramount, he stated smoothly, his tone oozing condescending authority. It ensures that every step is taken correctly and in the right order. When an untrained individual inserts themselves into that delicate process, it can have catastrophic consequences. Our priority was, and always is, Mr. Carter's well-being. We are just thankful that the situation was stabilized, despite the chaotic interference. The way he dismissed her life-saving intervention as the misguided intentions of an unqualified individual sent a fresh wave of righteous fury through the online commentators who had already judged and convicted her. Officer Miller's official report, which was promptly leaked to a local news outlet, further solidified the narrative against Eris. He described in dry bureaucratic detail her unlawful entry onto a restricted area and her physical altercation with Dr. Ramirez, emphasizing the critical importance of adhering to security protocols at large public events. The complete absence of any mention of Eris's medical assessment, or the fact that the athlete was, in fact, dying of a cardiac event, was a glaring, deliberate omission designed to portray her as a simple criminal. It was infuriating in its clinical disregard for the truth. Mark Donahue, meanwhile, was a master puppeteer, pulling strings behind the scenes. He subtly leaked carefully curated snippets of Eris's freelance work history to friendly journalists, painting her as a difficult personality who couldn't hold down a real job, implying a lack of professionalism and stability. He gave carefully worded interviews to major networks, lamenting the unfortunate incident, and emphasizing the millions of dollars invested in Leo Carter. We see these athletes as family, he said, his face a mask of paternal concern, but they are also significant assets. When their well-being is jeopardized by reckless, impulsive actions, we have to take a strong stand. The cold corporate language, dehumanizing Leo into a line item on a balance sheet, ironically began to sow the first tiny seeds of doubt in the minds of the more discerning viewers. Yet amidst the torrent of negativity, a small but persistent counter-narrative began to bubble up from the depths of the internet. On specialized medical forums and in private groups for paramedics and athletic trainers, the conversation was different. They were analyzing the video frame by frame, dissecting it with professional eyes. "Look at the way he's breathing," one ER nurse commented on a Reddit thread. "Classic agonal respiration. That's not a typical muscle injury response." Her chest compressions were textbook perfect. Depth, rate, recoil, she knew exactly what she was doing. The NAF doctor was palpating his damn leg while the guy was visibly cyanotic. That's malpractice, not protocol. These dissenting voices, initially drowned out by the louder chorus of condemnation, offered a flicker of validation, a fragile hope that the truth wasn't entirely buried. Eris, holed up in her apartment, felt the walls closing in. Her meager savings were dwindling. Her landlord had stopped leaving voicemails and started posting eviction notices on her door. She tried applying for a part-time job at a local gym, but the manager recognized her from the news and politely but firmly told her they couldn't risk the bad publicity. The humiliation was a constant, bitter taste in her mouth. Watching Donahue's smug, self-righteous pronouncements on television felt like a physical blow. Sarah's constant pleas for silence, for letting the legal process play out, grated against every fiber of Eris's being. Backing down when she knew she was right simply wasn't in her DNA. The rage bait had worked its magic. The audience despised the antagonists and yearned for Eris's vindication, even if most of them didn't yet realize it. Then, a lifeline. An unexpected email appeared in her inbox, the sender's name causing her heart to skip a beat. Jessica Chang. The journalist's initial article had been a brutal, sensationalist takedown, but something had clearly shifted. The email was brief and to the point. Dr. Thorne, I've been looking into this further. There are things that don't add up. The NAF's story is a little too perfect. Would you be willing to speak with me off the record? Eris hesitated for only a moment. Talking to the media had backfired spectacularly, but the thought of someone, anyone, actually wanting to listen, of a chance to plant a single seed of truth in the barren wasteland of lies, was too tempting to resist. She typed a short reply. Yashvik, when and where? That clandestine meeting in a noisy, anonymous coffee shop far from her apartment marked the first real crack in the NAF's carefully constructed wall of deceit. Jessica, a sharp, ambitious journalist in her late 20s, was initially skeptical, her questions pointed and probing. But as Eris recounted the events of that day, her medical expertise evident in her calm, detailed explanations of Leo's symptoms and the physiological reasons for her actions, Jessica's expression began to soften. Eris wasn't the hysterical fanatic from the news reports. She was a consummate professional, and her quiet conviction was more powerful than any of Donahue's blustering press conferences. Energized, Jessica started digging deeper, working her sources with a renewed sense of purpose. She had a tense conversation with her editor, who was reluctant to deviate from the sensationalist, high-traffic narrative. The crazy trainer angle is gold, Jess. Don't ruin a good story. But Jessica pushed back, her journalistic integrity overriding her career ambitions. She found other athletes Eris had worked with, and a different picture began to emerge. A portrait of a dedicated, intuitive trainer who consistently prioritized her athletes' health above all else. Then she got the text message, the anonymous tip sent to her encrypted email account that changed everything. Faulty defib, battery was dead on the first unit they brought out. Took them almost a minute to get the backup. Thorne saved him. Donahue is burying it. It was the bombshell, the missing piece. If true, it didn't just exonerate Eris. It exposed a level of negligence and corruption that was staggering. Jessica's journalistic instincts went into overdrive. She knew she had her story. Meanwhile, in his sterile, quiet hospital room, Leo Carter was slowly, painfully, clawing his way back to the world of the living. He remembered the race, the searing pain, the terrifying sensation of his heart stuttering and failing like a faulty engine. He also had fragmented, feverish memories of the chaos that followed. Panicked voices, blurred faces, and above it all, a woman's fierce, commanding voice and the relentless, rhythmic pressure on his chest. He peppered his parents and his agent with questions, trying to piece together the lost minutes of his life. When he finally learned the full story, how Eris Thorne, a freelance trainer he barely knew, had defied an entire organization, physically intervened, and was now being publicly crucified for saving his life, his characteristic easygoing confidence hardened into a cold, simmering rage. He watched the news reports from his hospital bed, saw the unflattering photos of Eris, the venomous online comments. He listened to Donahue's carefully crafted pronouncements, his stomach churning with disgust. "That's bullshit," he muttered to his agent, his voice still weak but laced with an undeniable conviction. "She saved me. They were standing around looking at my leg." Donahue, ever the master of public relations, visited Leo frequently, bringing gift baskets and projecting an air of paternal concern. "Leo, my boy, the important thing is you're recovering. We have the best people looking after you. This other situation is a distraction. It's being handled. You don't need to worry about it." But Leo was worried, and he was angry. "Where is she, Mark? The woman who helped me. What's her name?" Donahue's smile tightened imperceptibly at the edges. "She's Dealing with the legal consequences of her actions, Leo. It's best for everyone if you stay out of it. Focus on getting better. Leo's jaw clenched. He might be young, but he wasn't naive. He could read between the lines. They were trying to silence her, to erase her from the story and pin a medal on Dr. Ramirez. Ignoring Donahue's placating bullshit, he insisted on speaking privately with his agent. "I want to make a statement," he said, his voice gaining strength with every word. "The truth. I want everyone to know the truth." His agent, a shrewd man who understood the delicate dance of sports and celebrity, was initially wary of going to war with the all-powerful NAF. But he recognized the raw, unshakable conviction in Leo's eyes. He also understood the potential PR fallout if Leo, a beloved national hero, publicly contradicted Donahue's narrative. Working quickly and discreetly, they crafted a statement, bypassing the NAF's communication channels entirely. It was posted directly to Leo's official social media accounts, which had a combined following of over 15 million people. The impact was immediate and seismic. The post, a simple block of text against a black background, was a digital hydrogen bomb. "I'm alive today for one reason, and one reason only. Dr. Eris Thorne." While the official medical team was focused on a potential leg injury, Dr. Thorne had the courage and the expertise to recognize that I was experiencing a cardiac event. She didn't wait for permission. She acted decisively and professionally, performing CPR that kept blood flowing to my brain until the defibrillator arrived. She saved my life. The National Athletics Federation's decision to fire her and allow her to be publicly vilified is not only wrong, it's a moral disgrace. Mark Donahue, Dr. Ramirez, and anyone involved in this decision should be ashamed of themselves. Dr. Thorne is a hero, and I owe her everything. Within minutes, the internet, which had been so eager to condemn Eris, reversed course with the violent, whiplash-inducing speed of a digital mob. The hashtag #GoldForThorne, which had been a lonely, simmering ember in the undercurrent of dissenting voices, suddenly surged to the #1 trending topic worldwide. The carefully constructed narrative against Eris Thorne crumbled into dust. The rage that had been so effectively weaponized against her now turned, with the same fervent, righteous intensity, towards Mark Donahue, Dr. Ramirez, and the entire National Athletics Federation. The comment sections on news articles were flooded with apologies for misjudging Eris and blistering demands for the NAF to be held accountable. Donahue and Ramirez's social media accounts were inundated with a tidal wave of vitriol. In his gleaming corner office, Donahue watched his phone light up with calls from panicked sponsors, his carefully controlled world imploding in real time. Then Jessica Chang's follow-up article dropped. Prominently featured on the homepage of Athletosphere, it was titled, "The Cover-Up, Faulty Equipment, Medical Negligence, and the Trainer Who Refused to Back Down." It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, meticulously detailing her investigation, including the anonymous tip about the faulty defibrillator, now corroborated by 2 other sources from the NAF's junior staff, and the glowing testimonials from other athletes who had benefited from Eris's expertise. The narrative had flipped completely. Eris Thorne was no longer the villain. She was the courageous whistleblower, the lone voice of reason, who had been unjustly punished for doing the right thing. Mark Donahue and Dr. Ramirez, once untouchable figures of authority, were now the targets of public outrage and scorn. The International Olympic Committee, IOC, a notoriously cautious and conservative organization, found itself in an untenable position. Facing a massive public outcry and the potential for a catastrophic stain on the integrity of the Games just months away, they acted with uncharacteristic speed, announcing a full and independent investigation into the incident and the NAF's handling of it. The pressure on Donahue and his crumbling empire had become unbearable. The IOC's special hearing was a global media event. Broadcast live from Geneva, it became a de facto trial for the soul of professional sports. Donahue and Dr. Ramirez, looking pale and deeply uncomfortable under the harsh glare of the international press, were grilled by the IOC's ethics committee. Their carefully rehearsed denials and attempts to deflect blame were systematically dismantled by Jessica Chang's reporting, which was entered as evidence, and the compelling testimony of the other witnesses. The junior NAF staffer who had first tipped off Jessica bravely recounted how the first defibrillator had indeed failed, and how Dr. Ramirez had initially dismissed the call for a backup, costing them nearly a minute of precious time. Then it was Eris's turn. Dressed in a simple but professional dark blue suit, she exuded a quiet, unshakable dignity as she took her seat. She spoke not with bitterness or anger, but with the calm, unwavering authority of a medical professional who was absolutely certain of her actions and their necessity. She meticulously recounted the events of that day, explaining the subtle medical signs, the cyanosis, the agonal breathing, the specific physical posture that had alerted her to Leo's cardiac distress. She explained the physiological rationale behind her immediate intervention, her testimony a masterclass in clarity and conviction. "I did not have time to consider protocol," she stated, her voice clear and steady, her gaze fixed on the committee members. "I had time to save a life. My only regret is that I had to physically move Dr. Ramirez to do so. But faced with the same choice again, I would do the same thing. A life is not a line item in a rulebook." Her words hung in the silent room, resonating with a simple, profound truth that cut through all the corporate jargon and legal maneuvering. The hearing concluded. A few days later, the world tuned in for the IOC's verdict. The president of the committee, a distinguished former Olympian himself, took the podium. He spoke eloquently about the core values of the Olympic movement: friendship, respect, excellence. He emphasized that true excellence extended beyond athletic achievement to encompass courage, integrity, and service to humanity. In recognition of her extraordinary act of selfless bravery, her unwavering commitment to the well-being of an athlete in dire need, and for embodying the highest ideals of the Olympic spirit, he declared, his voice resonating with a solemnity that captured the gravity of the moment. The International Olympic Committee has voted unanimously to award Dr. Aris Thorne a special, discretionary Pierre de Coubertin Medal for exceptional sportsmanship. The announcement was met with a thunderous, sustained standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hall. Aris, who had been invited to attend the verdict, stood stunned, her mind unable to process the words. Sarah, sitting beside her, burst into tears, grabbing her sister's arm. As Aris was called to the stage, her legs feeling like lead, the rage that had fueled the entire narrative for weeks finally dissipated, replaced by a profound, overwhelming sense of justice and inspiration. As the heavy gold medal was placed around her neck, her eyes scanned the crowd and locked with a pair of familiar, intense eyes. In the front row, watching from a wheelchair but looking stronger than he had any right to, sat Leo Carter. Tears were streaming down his face as he applauded, his hands clapping with a fierce, percussive energy. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, a silent, powerful acknowledgement of the extraordinary bond forged in a moment of crisis and chaos. It was a victory more profound than any race he could have won. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Mark Donohue resigned from the NAF in disgrace, his career in sports administration over. Dr. Ramirez had his medical credentials suspended. Pending a full review by the medical board, his reputation irrevocably tarnished. The National Athletics Federation, humbled and exposed, underwent a complete top-to-bottom overhaul of its emergency medical protocols. The Thorne Protocol, a new set of guidelines emphasizing rapid, intuitive assessment and decisive action over rigid adherence to outdated procedures, was adopted not just by the NAF, but by athletic organizations worldwide. Aris visited Leo during his rehabilitation. Their conversations were no longer about the incident, but about the future. They were quiet and heartfelt, filled with a deep, mutual respect and gratitude. "You never gave up on me, Doc," Leo said one afternoon as she guided him through a series of light stretches. "Not on the track, not after." Aris simply smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "It's not in my nature." He insisted that she oversee his entire recovery process, trusting her implicitly with his career and his life. A year later, Aris Thorne was no longer an outsider, a freelancer fighting against a monolithic system. She had become a catalyst for profound change. With the help of a flood of generous donations from the public and a significant seed funding contribution from a fully recovered and fiercely loyal Leo Carter, she established the Thorne Institute for Athlete Welfare. a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing holistic medical care, mental health support, and fierce independent advocacy for athletes at all levels. The final scene is not one of grandeur, but of quiet purpose. Eris is in the bustling main gym of her new institute. She's not in an office. She's on the floor, working with a nervous teenage volleyball player who's recovering from an ACL injury. The girl is scared, tentative in her movements. Eris is patient, encouraging, her voice a soothing balm of expertise and genuine empathy. The gold medal, a symbol of her courage and the world's belated recognition, is not on display. It sits in a simple wooden box on a bookshelf in her office beside a framed photo of her and a grinning Leo Carter. She didn't need the medal for validation, but the world needed to see her receive it. Her victory wasn't just in saving one life, but in changing the entire game. The rage bait narrative had reached its powerful, cathartic conclusion, not in continued anger, but in the quiet, inspiring, and enduring victory of one woman who dared to do what was right, no matter the cost. Her story had become a testament to the enduring power of human compassion and the profound truth that the greatest victories are often won far from any finish line.